Alright, this section's on organisms. So we're going to look at the classification systems, like the different levels of it, how things are classified, and the major characteristics of the 6 major kingdoms, along with some details about viruses. So we're going to focus first on the different levels. What you see appearing on the screen right now is going to be the levels for a human. Okay, and so we really have 8 levels. Traditionally we had 7. Within the last about 10 to 15 years you've added domains, which is a broader topic. Then you have kingdom, then you have phylum, then you have class, order, family, genus, and species. Alright, and so really the kind of the name that goes with this is Dear King Philip came over for great spaghetti. It's kind of a way to remember the order, but this is, like I said, this is for humans, and it's important to understand the different levels and how they relate to each other. Now, when we're actually naming something, we don't want to list all 8 levels all the time, and so what we've decided, or what biologists have decided, is they're going to focus on the genus and the species. And what they're going to do is you're going to put your genus first, and it's going to be capitalized. That's the key point. And then the species is going to be lowercase. And it's typically italicized because it's in Latin, or it's written in cursive, like underlined or something like that. So you have all sorts of different examples that are listed here. But genus and species are very important because that's how we identify each individual organism. Alright, so like I mentioned before, domains are a newer category because they we really just got so broad. We really did get so broad in terms of the prokaryotes. So they divided them up into 3 big groups. The first group is archaea, and its kingdom is archaea. You have bacteria. Its kingdom is eubacteria, or sometimes you'll just see bacteria. It depends on what you're reading. And then the final one is eukarya. This is where you have protists, plants, fungi, and animals. Okay, so it was really to show how big the archaea and bacteria groups are, that the fact that the eukarya domain has all 4 of the 4 kingdoms, and that while the other 2 only have 1 each. Okay, so it's important to realize what the domains are and what are the kingdoms that are associated with it. Alright, so before we get into the actual meat of the details in terms of what the characteristics of the kingdoms are, we need to talk about viruses. Okay, viruses are not considered living. The biggest reason why is because they need a host cell to reproduce. Okay, they have 2 key things. They have DNA or RNA, which is some type of genetic material, and they have a capsid or a protein code. It depends on where you're reading it. They're basically the same thing. Okay, so like I said, protein code. These are the 2 key components of a virus. And again, they have to have a cell to reproduce. That's the biggest reason why they're really considered non-living. And antibiotics. Antibiotics only work on bacteria. Okay, so if you have a cold and you go to the doctor, they can't give you antibiotics because it won't work. A lot of times with viral infections, you just have to kind of let them take their course. And that's a very key thing to understand, is that antibiotics do not work on viruses. So they have 2 parts, DNA, RNA, and a capsid. Okay, so we're going to get into bacteria now. So a couple of things about bacteria. Okay, they are prokaryotic cells. Okay, some are heterotrophic, which means that they eat other things, and others are autotrophic, which means that they create their own energy, either through sunlight or through chemical reactions. And they have a lot of importance. They do a lot of different things. They can be decomposers. They can break stuff down. They can recycle the nutrients to the soil, which kind of goes with decomposers. They can fix nitrogen. That's an important thing that we'll talk about later with the ecology stuff. They add flavoring to our food. They help us digest food. And antibiotics can kill these. It weakens their cell wall, is how it really works. But it's important to understand some of these general characteristics of the kingdom of bacteria. Alright, the next group is the kingdom of Protist. The kingdom of Protist is kind of the misfit group of eukaryotes. They are eukaryotic. They typically are unicellular, like means that there's only one cell, but you can have some that are multicellular. They are autotrophic in some cases and heterotrophic in others, and we break them down into three groups. Because they're the misfit group, you basically have one of the other three kingdoms under Eukarya, the domain Eukarya, in here. So you have animal-like protists, you have plant-like protists, and you have fungi-like protists. And so each of these groups, I mean, we group them basically here based on their food. Like, how do they get their food? So animal-like are heterotroph. They're going to consume other things. Plant-like are going to absorb energy from the sun and make their own, are going to make glucose. And fungi-like are going to be decomposers. They're going to break stuff down. So we group these based on some characters, mostly based on how they get their food. And I said, this is the misfit group. Basically, if it doesn't fit into one of the other three, and it's typically single cells, they're going to stick it in here. Okay, so this is important for both bacteria and protists. They have two ways they really reproduce. They can reproduce asexually, which means that they basically make a clone of themselves through what we call binary fission. It's a lot like mitosis, but it's a little bit simpler. And then conjugation is their form of sexual reproduction. They actually swap a DNA between cells, and it gives them more variety, gives them more variation, and diversity, so that they can maybe survive better. But we call that conjugation. So binary fission is asexual reproduction for protists and bacteria, whereas conjugation is sexual reproduction. And just being familiar with those terms, like what do they mean when they talk about that, is really important. Okay, so here's some images of plant-like, animal-like protists, just to kind of show you examples of those. Alright, fungi. This is our next group. Okay, so fungi, their type, they are eukaryotic. They are heterotrophic, mostly decomposers, but they are heterotrophic. One thing that's really unique about them is they have chitin in their cell walls. It's a sugar. It's also found in bugs, like when you step on a cockroach and it goes crunch. That's chitin. So it can be very stiff and hard. And their importances are numerous. They can help us fight as an antibiotic bacteria. They can also cause disease, things like athlete's foot or ringworm. They are decomposers. We use them for food, like mushrooms. We also use them to help make food. Yeast is a fungi. It's used all the time in baking. So they are very helpful to us, both mostly positive, but at times negative. You know, black mold and things that can get in the house can make a house unlivable. So that's a more negative that can help with the disease part. Alright, plants. Okay, so plants are a big part of what we talked about. So some general characteristics, first of all, they are eukaryotic, they are multicellular, they also have cell walls, but their cell wall is made of what we call cellulose. I think we may have mentioned that in an earlier video. They are also autotrophic, okay, and you have two main groups. You have non-vascular, which does not have xylem and phloem, okay. This xylem is water, helps transport water. Phloem is sugar. That's the tube that basically transports sugar. And non-vascular don't have these. They also need moisture to reproduce, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. But vascular has the xylem and the phloem to help carry those things through them. Alright. Now reproduction here is a little bit differently. Okay, so reproduction here is going to be very unique. It's going to be alteration of generations. Okay, and this is a process that fungi also do, but it's more seen or more emphasized in plants. Okay, so you have this thing called a sporophyte. Okay, and the sporophyte is what we call diploid. It means it has two copies of each chromosome. Okay, you talked about that in the genetics view. The sporophytes are going to make spores. And then these spores are going to undergo meiosis. can make sure I can spell meiosis right here. Okay, so it goes under and undergoes meiosis. And once it goes under meiosis, it's going to create something known as a gametophyte. Okay, this gametophyte is what we call haploid. So now it only has one copy of every chromosome. Okay, those gametophytes are going to create the gametes. Now you can have one or two different gametophytes. And then the gametophytes are going to combine together in fertilization, similar to an egg and a sperm, and create the sporophyte. And so the lifespan of a plant goes between the sporophyte and the gametophyte and kind of cycles through. Now, for non-vascular plants, you have to use water, okay? They have to use moisture or water to do this. Whereas vascular plants typically don't, and they'll use seeds, okay? And this can go into two ways. Gymnosperms are going to have cones, whereas angiosperms are going to have flowers. Okay, that's how they create their seeds. Okay, and so the alternation of generations, they go through this, but with vascular plants, they focus on seeds for the most part, and the non-vascular plants don't. Okay, and then there are basically four important parts for a plant. Okay, for a vascular plant. Okay, the roots, these are going to be your anchor and absorption of like nutrients and water. The stem is going to be your support, and it's going to help with transport, like moving the stuff around. That's where the xylem and phloem is mostly going to be important. The leaves, the big thing here is photosynthesis. Okay, you have to do photosynthesis there. And then finally, flowers are going to be your reproduction. Okay, so that's really important to remember in terms of, you know, kind of just key words that you can help remember. Alright, so we talk about tropisms. Tropisms are, you know, plant movements, or another way to think about it is responses. Okay, so responses to the environment. Okay, and we've four ones, three of which we really talked about in class. You have phototropism, which is light, gravitropism, which is gravity, hydrotropism, that's the one we didn't talk about, but that makes sense, it's water, and then thymotropism, I believe is how you say it, is touch. So just understanding what these different terms mean in terms of if you're describing it, just, you know, like a response. Alright, finally we move on to animals. In animals, there's a lot of detail you can get into with animals, but we're going to kind of stick to the main details, or the big pictures. They're eukaryotic, they're multicellular, they do not have cell walls, and they are all heterotrophic. You have two main groups. You have invertebrates and chordates. Chordates also are vertebrates. That's another name you can have for them. And basically, invertebrates don't have a backbone, vertebrates do. That's the big difference. And you can get, and so this is showing you some of the characteristics of the subgroups. We're not going to go into that, but it's there if you want to read it. Also, vertebrates, more detail than you necessarily need to know. It goes into some specialization stuff. Alright, the final thing that we're going to wrap up on today is we're going to wrap up on animal behavior. Okay, animal behavior can be broken into two groups. Okay, you can have innate or instinctive behavior. This is things that animals have learned from birth. Like they don't have to, like, they don't really learn it. It's in their, almost in their DNA in a way. And then learned is something that is not born with. Okay, this is something you're gonna watch, you're gonna experience, you're gonna get information from. And those are your two broad categories. Instinctive behavior is almost like the picture shows up there of the hatchlings of turtles. They go towards the ocean. Like, that's instinctive to them. They immediately go there. Whereas learning sign language with gorillas is not. That's something they learn. Some other types of behaviors, you have hibernation, And hibernation is like resting during the cold weather. Estivation down here on the bottom is also hibernation, but it's during dry seasons, like during the summer when it gets real hot. You have migration because of food, or just weather or something like that. And then you have the fact that animals can be territorial, territoriality, and defending that territory. Okay, so those are just some quick overview of animal behaviors that are kind of the key things. And this ends our discussion about organisms.